Yep.
Hey, brother, how you guys doing? This is Krome Prophet Magazine TV. Today is Friday, December 23rd. And in the house, we got the famous Prophet. This dude, man, it's really funny because I'm going to tell you guys something. So a few years ago, I had one of my club members who used to always search the web for information and MC prophets and guys who just talking about great things. And I took it on myself and checked out a few of these webcast shows and listened to these guys. And a lot of them, to me, had a lot of holes in their story. Even though living up in Canada, I don't know, a lot of people who think we just don't know what the fuck is going on, but they're absolutely wrong. Then he brought me a guy named Prophet. And I got on YouTube and I looked at him. This brother was so brilliant, man. I was like, holy shit, where did this dude come from? And you look young, right? I'm well in my 60s. And but you have done your homework, and you didn't. If anybody deserved to write a book, it'd be you. And I kind of put this book on my Facebook thing a few times, and not because our name is forward on it. That's not what I'm pushing. I give two shits. That's nice that he did that. Beautiful man. Thank him so much. But this is a blueprint to motorcycle club culture. And I think a lot of these club guys need to read this book. It's called Prophet Speaks, the Historization of the MC Culture. And Brother Prophet's here today to talk about a little bit. Now, I'm going to ask you a question, Brock. Why did you write this book in the first place?
Man, I wrote this book, like it says in the very beginning of the book, I wrote this book for those who fucked up the culture and for those who were trying to save the culture. So for me, man, this book right here is really about my interjection into the culture as where I see the culture is today, understanding where the culture came from and what direction the culture is going. So I wrote this book because I want people to be able to understand the origin stories of this culture. I want people to know where we come from, what cultures have amalgamated into our culture to make us who we are. And then I want people to understand why we do the things we do. When we talk about traditions, when we talk about protocol, I want people to understand that there's a reason that we do these things. And as a historian, a trained historian, I thought, let me use my skills as a historian to really focus on the motorcycle club culture and bring that same level of research that I do in the classroom to the culture. And so I said, okay, let me write a book that really explains the origin stories of the nuances that we live with every single day in this culture. And a lot of us may not know why we do what we do, why we say what we say, why we wear what we wear. But I thought this is my intervention into showing the members of the culture and civilians why we do what we do.
Thank you so much for that, because I've been on this set for a minute, 40 years, and I met so many people have no idea doing what they do. Right now, the new blueprint for all this is Sons of Anarchy. They actually think that is the blueprint of motorcycle club culture. But I try to explain to everybody it's just entertainment.
Entertainment, absolutely.
And I'm pretty sure the guy who wrote the screenplay to that never been in a motorcycle club, and he probably doesn't even ride a bike.
Yeah, he's a great writer.
He's a great writer. It's entertainment. I loved it. Actually, be honest with you, since I've been around bikers for the last 40-something years, I think I only saw 2 episodes. And what I didn't like about the show was the black guys in the show was kind of like, I don't know what the hell, go get me a cup of coffee type of deal.
Yeah, it was subservient. Absolutely.
And I don't understand that's the message they were trying to relay everybody, that black clubs are really have no purpose. They're just here and everything else. Maybe you can explain that to me a little bit. Why even make a show like that and not have black bikers? And like right now, black bikers is the biggest social network going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and absolutely. You know what's weird about that's interesting that you bring that up with Sons of Anarchy. I am not anti Sons of Anarchy. I really enjoyed the entire season from front to back. I loved it. I watched every episode. I loved it. And I know a lot of people are anti Sons of Anarchy because of what Sons of Anarchy has done to the culture. I get that. But I will talk about this part with Sons of Anarchy. Sons of Anarchy is no different than Biker Boys and no different than Easy Riders. So I'm talking about 3 different motorcycle related movies that came about in 3 different eras that influenced 3 different generations. And each one of those movies had a different demographic that it appealed to. Easy Riders in the 70s, Biker Boys in the 90s, and then Sons of Anarchies in the 2000s. And each one of them had positive and negative effects on the culture. For instance, with Biker Boys, we see an influx of clubs that just came out of nowhere. They are literally responsible for the amount of clubs that are on the set now. Everybody saw Biker Boys and went out and got a vest and wanted to be kid and smoke and all this stuff. And we can say the same thing happened in the 70s with Easy Riders. With Sons of Anarchy, what they brought to the arena was they really highlighted the outlaw life, and they glorified it and they glamorized it, and it was hyper. It was over the top. I mean, they killed so many people in Redwood, it was ridiculous, and got away with all of it. But it's entertainment. And because it's Hollywood and we don't own the production rights, we're not the writers of it, they wrote Black people into it to be subservient. And so what this tells me again is that I always tell people we have to learn to write our own stories.
Thank you.
Tell our own narratives.
Right.
So if we want to let people know what the Black side of the Black biker culture looks like, then we own the responsibility to tell it.
Right. Well, one thing about your book is, and a few things I was going over it, the one thing, the most powerful part of the book was the females.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you elaborate on that and how you think about that? Because because I kind of feel the same way. I've always felt the same way you felt. Yeah. When I started the Gypsies, I wanted to do it very traditional. And then some people say, well, you can't have women in your club. Well, we're not an outlaw club. But the thing is, you can't have women in your club. And I thought about something. I says, well, some friends of mine up here have the Canadian Veterans Motorcycle Club, and the women are just in the club with the men. And he said something to me. He goes, well, why would I have all men when all the females went across Afghanistan and fought just as well as I did? So why couldn't they be in a club? And they thought about something with me. And I thought, is right now my club is not co-ed. I have one female, and the one female in my club has gotten probably more miles on her bike than all the guys. So I want you to touch more about the female riders and your perspective. I read some stuff in your books. Maybe you can explain it a little bit more to me.
Absolutely. So I wanted to write that chapter. I was very deliberate about writing that chapter, deconstructing genders and really talking about females, and then going even deeper and talking about Black women specifically. But from a broad perspective, talking about females in the culture, hey, we got to understand women have been here since 1910. All right, let's first and foremost, 1910, the first woman was invited to be part of a motorcycle club. So they have longevity. And then we have to look at the women who have reached the glass ceiling and then shattered it. Women like Bessie Stringfield. We're talking about women like Linda Daegu. So what I wanted to be very deliberate about is my respect for women riders and my love for women riders. From a non-academic standpoint, I do not want to be around a bunch of motherfuckers, dick swinging dudes. Women have a place in the culture, and that's who I want to be around when I'm in the culture as well. I don't want to be around only men in the motorcycle club culture. And I don't think there's a lot of other people want that too. And they can beat their chests and display all the bravado and saber rattling and say brotherhood, man. But the reality of it is, soon as there's a bunch of men, we looking around like, where the women at? Another aspect of that is that I think women have earned the right to be recognized for what they've done and their accomplishments. Again, we have a propensity to marginalize the accomplishments of women in this culture and to act that, okay, she done it, but she didn't do it the way I would have did it. Or she might have done it, or only one or two have done it. It's false. It's a falsehood. Women ride from the top of this country to the bottom, from the left coast to the right coast. There's no place that women don't ride in this country. They are ground pounders all over this country. And I know ground pounding women, you know ground pounding women, the people listening to this know ground pounding women who get it on all over this country. So if men have set the bar here to say this is what you need to do to be recognized, women have achieved it by going here. And women have always understood that to be recognized, you have to do twice as more of them, twice as more to get half the recognition. Women understand this. Women are no stranger to patriarchy. They're no stranger to androcentrism. And so what they've done is they've risen to the occasion and they deserve to be recognized. And so my purpose of writing that chapter of deconstructing gender was to really, one, give reverence to women and to show my perspective on why I think it's important that we recognize women for the accomplishments. And I'm not trying to change the mindset of patriarchal men. Think how you think. But I'm saying from my perspective, I appreciate, I enjoy women around, I want them in the culture, and I recognize their accomplishments and what they bring to this culture.
Another great thing you wrote in the book was what I really liked was the history. You know, a lot of great history about things about the culture that a lot of people really don't know. Yep. And in my clubhouse, what we do is we have a wall full of history. So if even when Americans come up here, they start reading, it goes, well, I didn't know that. You know, I think it's very important that history should be told. Now, tell me a little bit about the history of some of this stuff, because you're a historian anyway. And I thought it was beautiful. Like you just talked about women been writing since 1903 or 4. That's very important. Tell us a little bit about history.
So I am a historian, man. I taught history at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte as part of a program where I was going through and getting my master's. That was a beautiful opportunity. I've always been into history. I absolutely love history because I think it's important to know the history in something. In fact, I think history is the most important subject that a person can know, especially a person of color. And so I took that same ideology of having to know history and I took it over here to this motorcycle club culture, because what I found out was that as I was growing up in this culture, people were telling me things, OGs were telling me things that happened, but they weren't giving me the history behind it. They were only telling me what was passed down to them and what was passed down and passed down and passed down. And so being the historian that I am, I wanted to really dig into the origin stories of a lot of these things and really try and uncover where does this come from and how deep does the rabbit hole go. And so a large part of this book is historically based. For instance, I dig into the various positions in a club. And I don't just say, you know, this is the sergeant at arms and, you know, sergeant at arms comes from, you know, a lot of corporations have sergeant at arms or a lot of organizations have sergeant at arms. No, I say so history of sergeant at arms comes from 12th century when kings used to march and they had a sergeant at arms. It was 36 of them or it was 28 of them, or King Richard I had 24 of them. So I really get into the history of where this come from. And I think if you read this book, you'll find that a lot of the things that you knew about, but you didn't know the history of it. You didn't know how far back this goes. One of the things I always touch on is social clubs. Social clubs somehow have become the bane of the MC culture, and yet we don't understand how far back social clubs go. We're talking about 1800s in England. We're talking about late 1800s in America. We're talking about the fact that social clubs used to be all men and they had a 3-year waiting list to get into them. Then we're talking about social clubs on the Black side down in New Orleans, which were mutual aid societies. One of them still exists today, which is called the Zulus. The motorcycle club culture today, the social clubs, are direct descendants of those type of social mutual benefit aid organizations like the Zulus. Wow. Even in the 1960s, they had social clubs like the Ebony Leading Ladies, and Pure Passion. This is on the Black side. And this is Toby Jean who is telling us this. The man himself is telling us in his book about social clubs in the 1960s. So I thought it was incredibly important to really look at the history of something and to show people just how far back these things go. And so if you're going to frame your ideology around something, know the history of it, and then make an informed decision.
There's some very wise words, what you just said, know your history, because up here in Canada, there's no history of anything here. I had some guys who rolled up to me once and said, they were the first interracial mixed club in Canada. And I said, no, you're not. And they said, well, who was it? I was called this, the Satan's Choice. 1963. They started up in Toronto, Canada, and spread out through Canada. It was the largest motorcycle club. They had blacks, they had Chinese, they had everything here until the big three came here. The Outlaws and the Hells Angels and the Banditos, and they said, well, their protocol, so no blacks allowed, so it all disbanded. But it is really funny, because if they were still around today, they would be huge in the 1960s. In the 80s, they switched over to those other clubs. So history is reporting. So when I explained to the guys, they get mad at me, and I said, well, you know what? Do some fucking homework. Before you talk to me, talk to somebody. It's like giving me some text that somebody else told you. You're not the first interracial motorcycle club, the Satan Joy Club. Anyway, let's get into it. Another thing you were talking about, and there was outlawism and the 1% world. So many people really don't understand that whole concept. What is an outlaw? Where does it come from? Like I say, Sons of Anarchy, it says, it's a bunch of dudes around the table trying to rob banks and commit crimes and organize. And a lot of dudes think that's what it is.
Yeah.
In outlaw, I'm a badass. It's really funny, because I see dudes 40 years old join a club and put a patch, and all of a sudden they're a tough guy, right? Because that gives them validation. And I had never thought that, because I met outlaws all through the 80s, and they were some of the coolest dudes on the fucking planet. Then I met some 99% guys to still whoop your ass if you got in their face. So it doesn't mean anything. So let me explain a little bit about outlawism and what does it mean to be a 1%er.
So in our culture, the designator 1%er, as we all know, is a top tier in our culture if we're dealing with hierarchies within the motorcycle club. Outlawism is not a title. It's not a person. It's a state of mind. Outlawism is for anybody who was willing to live a life outside of the law. And outside of the law does not indicate crime. I think that's a misnomer that we get wrapped around of, I live outside of the law, and we always associate that with crime. That's not the case. Outside of the law just means that you make your own rules and you live by them. And so outlawism is the idea that, hey, I live my life according to the rules that I set, and I'm willing to deal with the repercussions, the consequences, and the glory that comes with that. So I think one of the things that we really have to deconstruct is this idea of outlaws and crime. We have to really take that apart and break that down. That is not the case. And I think movies or shows like Sons of Anarchy have married those two things together. And now that's what public perception is. But really, outlawism is living your life according to your rules. Now, there are people who are outlaws who are not in outlaw clubs, because they live their life according to their own rules. The only difference is within our culture, we have a hierarchy within our culture, and we have labels in our culture. So there are 1%ers who are definitely outlaws. All 1%ers are outlaws because they've chosen to live their life outside of the law, and that's inherent with being a 1%er. But then there are outlaws who are not 1%ers. They don't have the label of being a 1%er. They're not in a 1%er club. But make no mistake, they're outlaws. They live their life outside of the law. They live their life outside of the establishment that society has set for us. They live their life the way they want to. And that means whatever they want to do. I think one of the problems is that civilians do this a lot. They try to define what is the left and right limits. When it comes to outlawism, we define those limits. Civilians, people outside of our culture, try and tell us what's acceptable and what's not. Outlawism about us defining what's acceptable and what's not. So in order to understand the ideology, the mindset of outlawism, you have to understand that it's about us. It's about each individual person who says, I'm going to live my life on my terms, and I'm going to deal with the glory and the consequences that come with that. That's what outlawism is.
This is why I like being a biker. Because you know what? I get talking to bikers, and the bikers on the set, especially on the black set, they're some of the smartest, brilliant men I've ever met in my life. And I noticed that my guys, you know, once we started putting patches on riding motorcycles, they had started meeting men like you, and they're like, God damn it, I can't believe that guys are so smart. It's just totally different than civilians. Let's talk about symbols. You put this in your book, swastikas and iron cross. You know, some people had took those things and made their own, like the Nazis did with the swastika, which they don't belong to them. It belongs to the Indians, to South Asians, if I'm not correctly. It's the Indian, the South Asians. Explain. You talked about that in your book too, because I wear a really cool bracelet, and I got and I like the Maltese cross.
Yeah.
And I had it around my neck and everything. I mean, anyway, I had a friend of mine, which is Jewish, was staring at it, and I had to explain. I said, look, let me tell you something right now. This has got nothing to do with you. I fucking just like this.
That's right. That's right.
I'm gonna wear it. So you can take it where you want to wear it. I'm fucking wearing it. So you can stare at it all you want, but it doesn't mean I hate you. You're my friend. I love you to death. You've been my friend for years. You're staring at it, but you're not saying anything. So maybe you can explain more about the Iron Cross and the swastika and kind of where it came from.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So one, I wanted to really dig into symbols in my book because, again, our culture is made up of symbols and symbolism. And one of the two that you'll definitely see is the Maltese cross and the swastika. I talk a lot about the swastika, and I do this when I have an opportunity to lecture because I think people need to understand the true origins and the true nature of the swastika. I think people don't understand the swastika before 1937. They don't understand that before the People's Republic of Germany and social workers led by one guy, Adolf Hitler. They don't understand that there's a history of swastika going back 15,000 years. They don't understand how deep and how far back the swastika goes. And so I truly try to explain to them that the Boy Scouts of America used to use the swastika. Coca-Cola used to use the swastika. There was a swastika beauty pageant that was held in America. There was a hockey team that used the swastika as their symbol. There is a United States Army unit prior to World War II. Their shoulder sleeve insignia was the swastika. And that's in more modern times. If we were to go back to ancient Egypt, ancient China, ancient Japan, ancient India, if we were to go back to those days, we would see the swastika all over. And that tells you that the swastika was a global symbol. One thing we have to get out of our mind is our narrow-minded frame that Adolf Hitler perverted the swastika and it's always been. We have to erase that. Absolutely, he did pervert the swastika. Absolutely. But he is not the beginning, nor is he the end of the swastika. So I think it's very important that we understand the origin stories of the swastika and what it actually means. And about the Maltese cross, that goes back to the island of Malta, 1219. We're running around here with symbolisms that go back hundreds, even thousands of years, but we don't understand that. And that's my intervention into the culture, just to show people just how far back these symbols go. So the Knights of Malta, we wear their symbol today. And I really wanted to tell how those symbols somehow found their way into this culture. What is a guy like you? What is a guy like me doing wearing a 2,000 and a 15,000-year-old symbol? Well, there's a reason behind it. And my book explains how those symbols found their way into our culture today.
It's just like anything else. It's like, you explain something else in your book about men wearing the duster coats and spurs. Some guys want to look like a fucking cowboy, and I get that. But there's a true meaning behind that. Maybe you can explain a little about the duster coat and the spurs on their boots.
Absolutely, man. First thing you have to understand is that the duster coat is not an item of fashion. It's a functional piece of equipment. No different than the cowboys of the 1800s who wore the duster coat as a functional piece of equipment. We wear it today as a functional piece of equipment. If I could say anything to people with a duster coat, is don't look at the duster coat as a piece of fashion. I know it's beautiful. I know it's intimidating. I understand it. It's a beautiful. Before I was a part of the organization that I was with, I was amazed with the duster coat. I understand the hype behind it, but we also have to understand that the symbolism behind it goes back to honoring people who came before us. The same with those spurs. It's not about the sound of clicking and clacking and looking good when I walk into a place, but rather when you see me in those spurs, you see Bass Reeve. When you see me in those spurs, you see Issam Dart. You see Black men who settled the Wild West when a time when white people didn't want Black people around. You see hard charging Black men walking with me. That's why I wear those spurs. That's why I wear that duster. It's a functional piece of equipment, but also it's a legacy thing. It's about honoring those Black cowboys who came before me, whose name is rarely mentioned in mainstream media.
I think that the one movie I liked was The Harder They Fall, because they introduced Black cowboys, and in that movie, like Bass Reeves, like the Lone Ranger, him and a few other guys in that movie, because a lot of people didn't know Black cowboys even existed. My generation knew that, but guys a lot younger didn't never really get it. They didn't even understand the word cowboy, where it came from, because
absolutely,
slaves were able to break horses better than anybody else. We got about 10 more minutes on this thing, and then but one more question I want to ask you. Can you please explain the three-piece patch? Because a lot of people don't really understand that.
Okay, absolutely, man. So the three-piece patch is the result of the gypsy tours. So back in the day, in the 40s, they used to have something called the gypsy tours, which are traveling races. During the gypsy tours, the AMA was in charge of the gypsy tours. When the AMA set the rules for the gypsy tours, they started to exclude some of these clubs and say, nope, you have this type of bike, you can't race. Nope, we don't want you in our race. Nope, we're not dealing with you. And so when they did that, these clubs were excluded from the gypsy tours. So in rebellion of that, they took that oval patch that everybody used to wear and they cut it in three pieces. And they said, we're going to have a top, a center, and a bottom. Now, what's more important than that is that those three pieces actually have a ton of meaning to them. And so we look at them as just a three-piece patch. But really, for those who wear that three pieces, they should understand the meaning and the symbolism behind it. Meaning, the bottom rocker states your territory. It states where you're from. It states what you're willing to defend. The top rocker tells who you are, what you represent, what you're about, what is your legacy. And then that center patch is a visual representation of all the people and everything that goes into your specific organization. So yes, three-piece patch is very sacred in this culture, and I understand why. It harkens back to a time of rebellion. Those people who created the three-piece patch created it out of rebellion. They created it out of there's this idea of being separated from mainstream media. And so today, people who wear the three-piece patch should do so as an honor to those early rebels who started this entire thing.
Wow. See, that's why it's so important for everybody to get this book. Because, and I'm not trying to, this ain't, you know what? This man didn't even write this book about money, but he has to get his money back from making a book. But he just wanted to share all the things he knows, all the knowledge he has, all the years he's read books and met people and broke bread with people and put it all in one thing, which here is this book. Please, everybody, get this book. And I've read it, and my club members have got it. They're reading it, and it is really important in today's time, especially if you got a club, you're a club president, you're trying to run a club, because at the end of the day, your club member's going to ask you questions. You better fucking know. You can't make this shit up as you go along. And the smarter you are and the more brilliant you are, you have more success in your motorcycle club. Hey, brother, you know what? This is great what you have done. And you got anything else on the works that you want to do? And I know this is not your last book. I don't even know if this is your first book, but it's so fucking brilliant that I'm going to read it again after I'm done again.
I
So
got
what
I got
is
two
that
things,
going
man.
next?
Two things that's in the work real quick, man, is one, I'm working on a children's book, and the central character is a black biker. I think that's very important because there isn't a body of work out there for children that really shows positive black bikers in any type of light. So I really want to introduce that to children and to start raising them up with this idea of what it means to be a black biker outside of the negative connotation that mainstream media puts on us. The other thing that I'm working on is I want us to be in the Smithsonian Museum. I think it's an awful shame that as large and as deep and as wide as this culture is, it's not represented in the Smithsonian. I've gone to the Smithsonian, I looked at all the displays, and they do a marvelous job of cataloging and presenting Black culture. They lack when it comes to the Black biker community. And I think it's time that our image and our story is told by us and ultimately through a institution such as the National African American Museum Smithsonian.
I think that the day that we get a museum, I'm not sure if we have one in America. If we had a museum in America that talked about Black history and Black all the people who contribute to making this world MC the Black set so beautiful, they can learn about it. I think the thing is we don't have a platform to even introduce this to the institute. What you're talking about, there's no platform other than social media.
Yep.
And see, like you, the man who came and tried to start something like this because you get a lot of knowledge behind all this and a lot of experience, and on the MC set and the outlaw world and everywhere else, you'd be the person to do this, And it's funny because you're not even from California, because
Nope.
California has a whole different biking community out there in the east and the west and the south. One thing I liked about California, there was really no bullying there between the clubs. It's everywhere else in America. And when I sat down, I interviewed Toby Jean for a film that I did 20 years ago. And I asked him about that. Why was it really no bullying? He says, because we figure more clubs, more parties. Simple as that. Because
Yep.
California had a beautiful motorcycle set. And there
Yep.
was really no wolves out there. That's more or less in the South. And what do you think that is in the South and the Midwest and the East? Why do you think it's more of that out there? If they have a different understanding of it, and maybe only because they get 6 months out of the year to ride, and the dudes out west, they have a lot more fun. I don't know.
It could be it too. Man, I don't know. I truly don't know. And I think about that often, but I'm very concerned with the future of the culture and where we're going because I look at it like this. Again, I'm a historian, so I study history. I study the mafia. I study gangs. I study ancient civilizations. I study tribes. I study all these things. And what I've noticed is that they all were brought down by someone outside of them, infiltrating them, pitting them against each other.
Right.
And our culture is no different. We would be fools to think that we can outdo what they did and to survive what they didn't survive by doing the same thing they did. If we're to survive, we got to get smart and think differently. We are not each other's enemy. There's some outside forces who are our enemy, and they're doing a damn good job of tearing us apart. That's what I want to change.
That's so brilliant you said that because I already thought that, but I wasn't sure, so I wasn't gonna fucking say it. But you said it, because it's funny about this whole motorcycle thing we started the Gypsies. Is so many brothers come up and want to visit us, and I think that's fucking amazing. And the nicest man, these clubs, and I give shout outs to them all the time. But then everybody tells me about the dark side to all of this, and I said, well, we never done anything to them, so why the fuck would we do something? But I guess, like you say, it's some outside event. Somebody outside probably doing it, hitting people against each other. I don't know. Brother, we're about to run out of time here, but you know what? I wanted to bring you on. It was really important. I've been thinking about you for about a year. I wanted to bring you on because you're magical, man. What you do is magic, fucking magic. And
You,
teach magic. And you're a gifted young man. You're very gifted and very smart. You're going to be one of the leaders in the MC world, either on the social media or running some big major club, because everybody should be thinking about it, because what you're doing, man, is amazing. I thank you so much for what you've done for all of us. Pete, to get up to your work. I can't wait for that children's book to come out.
Yep.
And that's about it, brother. And I'm going to talk to you again. This is Krome Prophet Magazine. This is Brother Prophet. Anything you want to say, brother, before you leave?
I'll be speaking at the Proc January, mid-January. So if you're attending the Proc, I would love to see you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank
Call you
you.
later. Ciao.
Peace and blessings, brother.
Prospect Magazine. This is Krome. Good night. Merry Christmas.